Welcome, everyone. So glad to have you joining us for our program today. If you are here for the first in our series of Your Career in Transition, you are in the right place. My name is Greg Stevens from Purple Cow Career and Talent Development, and it is my pleasure to welcome you all to this series. I want to let you know that part of my reason for launching this series was because I really felt compelled to give something back to my colleagues in the field, many of whom, like you, may be going through some kind of career disruption. And of course, that's what this whole series is about. Just a quick housekeeping reminder, if you have just logged in, please make sure to turn your microphone off as well as your video. We'll let you go live with video and audio a little bit later in our program. Of course, today is the first in a series that we'll be hosting every Tuesday and Thursday throughout May, starting at 2:30 p.m. East Coast time. And if you have already signed up for other webinars in this series, terrific. I look forward to seeing you. And I do notice that many of you have registered for many and all of the programs. And if you haven't had a chance to sign up, now is your chance to do so, or at some point today. I encourage you to sign up. There's lots of good information coming your way. Today, I'm joined by a dear colleague, mentor, and friend, Wendy Luke, the HR Sage, who is going to walk us through some key points about understanding and managing your stress in this career transition or career disruption. Wendy, welcome. Thanks for being here with me today. And we'll hear from Wendy in just a couple of moments, but I just wanted to give a special shout out. Wendy and I have been colleagues and friends and collaborators for a long, long time. And I'm thrilled to have her join me for the first of this webinar series. And as I pointed out here on the slide, Wendy was my co-editor on the book we created called A Life in Museums, Managing Your Museum Career. And many of you in the audience come from the museum field, but I also know there's a handful of you who are not from the museum field, and everybody's welcome here. I should also acknowledge that this program and series is presented in collaboration with the Mid-Atlantic Association of Museums and the Virginia Association of Museums. So before we get started officially, and as folks make their way into the room, I want to pull up a couple of images and find out if this is a little bit what your career path looks like right now. Or it may have been what your career path looked like about 2 months ago. Conversely, your career path may look something a little bit like this. Some directional signs, some highway signs, a couple of options, but you may not be exactly sure which way to go. Or you may be like this fellow out in the middle of a desert somewhere in the middle of a road, maybe lost, but it looks like he's got a roadmap and possibly a way forward. Or as many of you might be feeling, I know that this is on our minds a lot right now, you just aren't sure what the future holds, and this causes a lot of anxiety, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of stress, especially when we don't know what is going on in the world. And of course, that's what we're going to be talking about today. Or you might have been feeling a little bit like this Gary Larson cartoon from several years ago, and all of a sudden, wham, this thing came right out of left field. And I think we can all agree that this global pandemic that has landed on us literally came out of left field. So wherever you happen to be in your mind, in your heart, or thinking about your career disruption, hopefully this program today at the beginning of this series is a way to help you get started on that. To put a few words to what you might be thinking, Wendy and I have thought about this and would love to hear from you in the chat box. with a word or two to describe what you're thinking or feeling right now. So take a moment, think about what you're feeling or thinking right now about your career disruption, and just type it into the chat box, and we'll see what comes of that conversation. And Wendy, let's take a look together and see what we've got.
Some limbos coming up. Scared, determined, nervous, anxious, opportunistic, confused, off track, empowered and frightened, stuck, uncertainty, frustration, a choice point crossroads, nervous about the future, downtrodden, stuck, stalled, not in control, grief, disappointment, clueless, lost, waiting for the shoe to drop.
Yeah, a lot of range of feelings. And Wendy, you and I have been talking about this for the last couple of weeks as we've been preparing for this program. And I know that you and I both know many colleagues, many of whom are in this program audience today, who are facing very specific career disruptions, whether they are recently furloughed or recently laid off, might just be graduating from school and looking for their first museum job or another kind of job, or people who might be in career transition in some other ways, maybe thinking about moving from one field to another, or maybe had plans to move up within their organization. So we've got a lot of emotions and thoughts going on in our audience. Does this ring true with what you're experiencing with your colleagues as well?
Absolutely. And the range is pretty consistent. There's one talking about being an older professional, and that's really hitting home and puts added pressure on people who feel that there is ageism going on in addition to everything else.
Absolutely. Well, folks, this quick exercise in the chat box is intended, obviously, to get a sense of what you're thinking and feeling about with regards to your career disruption. But it's also an opportunity to prime you a little bit, because as Wendy goes through our program presentation today, she'll be pausing to ask a few questions of you. And we hope that you'll take the opportunity to think briefly and then type a couple of comments into the chat box so that we can all share and learn together. So Wendy, with that said, I'm going to turn the stage and the microphone over to you and let you do your magic.
Thank you, Greg. And I'm really appreciative of all of you for taking this hour to be with the two of us. And I have three foci for today's program. One, loss and grief are real. Resiliency and reducing stress, and also choice and small steps. And I have an aspiration for today, and that is that this is a safe space, that you'll all be learning, that you will in fact leave with at least one insight, and that you'll have a sense of growth. I know that everyone is feeling loss, and loss of normalcy, of connection, of routine, of work, of going out, of safety, stability, financial security, predictability, control, and even in some cases, loss of self. So, the focus that we have on loss and grief, and that they're real, on resiliency and reducing stress, and choice, the Kaizen way. So I'm going to be giving you information. I'm going to be taking you through some exercises, and the exercises are exercises that you'll be able to do and use on your own. And at the very end, you'll have an opportunity to ask questions and for clarification. So I wanted to start off by taking you through a little exercise, which I call the think of exercise, think about. And I'd like you to think quickly about something, a small or medium irritation. It's something that you're likely to feel somewhere in your body, maybe because your shoulders get tight, or it's in your gut, or you feel your jaw get tight, something of that nature. And it is not World War III. So think about that irritation. I'm going to think about my irritation. And we're just going to sit with it. And it's as if you're sitting with it and either the irritation is stuck on you or you're stuck on the irritation. So let's just sit, each of us, with the irritation. All right, enough of that irritation. And now I'm going to center you. And for this centering, I'd like you to keep your eyes either gently open or slightly focused down. And the reason I'd like you to have your eyes open is that you could use centering even when you're in a meeting or with other people, provided you keep your eyes open, because it would be very strange to be in a meeting and suddenly just close your eyes. And I'd like you to sit with your feet comfortably on the floor. And if anyone's standing, think about your feet being hip width apart. And you're going to, whether you're sitting or standing, that sense of a long spine and a long neck. And in fact, if you want to really lengthen your spine, you can just gently tap your head and lift your hand up. And generally, you'll just get a little bit taller. So your posture is really a posture of dignity. And with that, inhale up and uplift, and the energy flowing over your head and down your front. Long exhale. Think of something that makes you smile. The lips turn up kind of smile. Expand and balance your space on your right side and your left side, and in front of you and behind you, and above your head and below your feet. And what would it be like if there were just a little bit more ease in your body? Maybe your shoulders would drop just a little bit without collapsing. And for good measure, that uplift inhale, long exhale. Think of something that makes you smile. And now think of that same irritation, and we'll just stay with that irritation for just a little bit. So what have you noticed? And in the chat box, what have you noticed between the first time you thought of that irritation and the second time after centering? Just drop it in the chat box. So some of the common stress is still there, but a little less physically overwhelming, not powerful, some relaxation. Something seemed a little less significant, feel free. Hard to focus on the irritation after the exercise. It dissipated. So what's really important about this exercise, and you see how fast it was, is that when you're stuck on something, this is such a good way of getting unstuck. And there's a reason for it chemically in our body. Because when you're under stress, which is that first part of this exercise, your muscles contract, and some of them are internal and some of them are external. You know, crossing your arms or scowling can be the external. Shoulders can be hunched over, and yet inside your muscles can be contorted. And you produce cortisol, the hormone cortisol. And it goes to your brain, except it goes to the amygdala, this small part in your brain. Fight, flight, freeze. So you're really stuck and you can't access information, and you can't see big picture, and it's hard to make decisions. It's hard to take any risks. And when you centered and you elongated your muscles, and then you used your breath and the long exhale, and you amplified it by thinking of something that makes you smile, you stopped producing cortisol. You started producing oxytocin, which, by the way, is a hugging and connecting hormone, and testosterone, which is your confidence hormone. And with that, it goes to your prefrontal cortex and you get your mind back again. So information and big picture thinking and creativity and innovation and risk taking all come back to you. And it's really very fast. So it allows you to be able to begin to see things that you were previously stuck on. So the value of centering, and it works every time. And if you think it hasn't worked well enough, then just do it a second time or a third time, and you'll find that the stressors get a little bit outside of you, and therefore you have more option and more choice.
And Wendy, what did you call the hugging hormone?
Oh, it's oxytocin. It's OXYTOCIN, oxytocin.
Thank you so much. I'm going to remember that the next time I see you.
Absolutely. We can, produce it and hug, and it just does all the right things. So we're really living in a very, very disrupted world. I mean, what we do and how we do it and who we do it with. All of you are experiencing one of the most disruptive stressors you could possibly have. On the stress meter, the high up things, loss of job, divorce, the loss of a loved one or a child, changing residences. These are all really big things. And then not only do you have all of that really big thing going on, you have all the little things going on, whether it is because of social distancing or it's because staying in place, or you go to the supermarket and they don't have what you want, like Clorox, whatever. And so with loss comes grief. And they really do go hand in hand. So Elizabeth Kubler-Ross many years ago created a model about grief: shock and denial, bargaining, anger, depression, acceptance. And it's not a straight line to go through this, and it zigzags. And sometimes you can go forward and back, and you can even get to acceptance and fall back into one of the earlier phases. And not only are you going through it, think about the fact that other people in your life and around you, whether it's family or friends, are going through, or colleagues, are going through similar things, and loss and the grief that comes with loss. So there's been a development of taking this and modifying the Elizabeth Kubler-Ross stages of grief and adapted for a business crisis situation. So the sensibility about shock, which is in your case, for example, the moment that you were laid off or furloughed. Denial, which is the disbelief or looking for more evidence, that kind of thing. It can be confusion, it can be fear. Frustration, which is the recognition that things are really different. And it can be accompanied by anger, or it could be anxiety, that kind of feeling. And then there's always depression, which is low energy, low mood, feelings of being overwhelmed, helplessness, hostility, and sometimes even flight. And then in this business model, you get to a point where there's experiment, where it's the initial phase of engagement, where you're looking at new things. You might be sharing your story. You might be tentatively coming up with a new story, for example. And then this model goes on to decision, which is really learning how to work in a new world. And it is really a commitment. You're beginning to try some new things, and they're actually feeling pretty good. So in the Elizabeth Kubler-Ross model, you're probably at decision, which is at acceptance. And then in this business model, it's really integration. And it's when it all comes together and you are clearly on that new path, and you're really fully committed to it. So again, as with, when I said sometimes you can zig and zag on this model. And what it does do is it really allows you you can see about where the aspiration of where you're going to and getting to.
And Wendy, I want to pause just for a moment as you're talking about this model adapted for business crisis. I'm looking also at the chat responses when we first started our program, asking people what they're thinking or feeling. And so many of those responses fit on somewhere here on this model, mostly in the shock, denial, frustration, and depression areas.
Absolutely. And that really is to be expected. And also, you've really been in this state for a fairly short period of time. And people think sometimes that they can really rush through this. Your body and your mind are not going to, but especially your body, are not going to allow you to really rush through it. And by the way, it doesn't mean you have to go through all the steps, although frequently most of us will go through it, most of the steps, even if it's for a very short period of time. So for you, when you think about this curve, where are you on this curve? And what stages of the curve have you experienced? And if you put that in the chat box, we'd appreciate it very much. So we're getting a variety of places: decision, frustration, depression, somewhere between depression and experiment.
Yeah, I see a lot of folks who are in between areas.
Right, right. Or a sense of combination, or and varying, as you said, going between or betwixt and between, as the case might be on it.
Well, as we're looking at these responses, Wendy, I was also reflecting, somebody earlier commented, their comment was hopeless, or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it made me think, and as you're talking, that these stages, of both from a personal level and in a career context, are entirely normal. It's what we do as human beings. So wherever you happen to be, whether it's hopeless or some other part of this model, that it's exactly what you should be feeling.
Right. In other words, it's not comfortable and it's to be expected. Absolutely. So when you think about the people who are close to you, so where are they on this curve? So again, there are a lot of responses that are all over the place. And again, some of them is moving from one to another. There were a number that were in experiment or decision making. Then there are some that are lower down on the curve, meaning depression or frustration with it. So what you can see is that where you are and where these people are might not be the same thing, or you're not at the same place at the same time. And so what have you noticed because you're not at the same place at the same time? You're coming from different places on this curve. So in the chat box, what have you noticed?
Well, as folks respond, one of the things I've been thinking a lot about, Wendy, that you and I have talked about is, but part of the reason why I decided to launch this webinar series is because I saw so many of my colleagues being furloughed or laid off, their businesses closed, not only museums, but restaurants, and really feeling sort of helpless, like I really can't do anything about that. And also trying not to absorb a lot of that trauma, but I can't help it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. And again, when you look at the responses in the chat box, that most people don't connect with you because how you're feeling is in a different place. There's difference in emotions. There's disconnection in finding allies or positive networking and support. Taking care of me. Yeah, and we ask this question because there's a recognition that where you are and where they are not necessarily the same thing. It can make communication more difficult. It can make you not want to talk at a time where talking, in fact, is really, and talking out is generally a good thing to do on it. And it's also extremely beneficial for you to even be able to have conversations about where you each are on this curve and what it's like and how things change over time. So I really encourage you to share the information that you're gathering today on this. So what's intensifying all of your experiences right now and the people that are around you is that we are living in a VUCA world. This, by the way, was created by the Army in the 90s. So volatility is the speed and magnitude and the dynamics of change. And uncertainty, the extent to which you can or cannot confidently see the future. And complexity is the multiplicity, diversity, and interconnectedness of factors. And ambiguity, which is lack of clarity. And the more ambiguous, the harder it is, for example, to analyze. And VUCA just affects every one of us in our heads and our hearts and even in our gut on it. And what happens during VUCA, these VUCA times, is that you're producing cortisol, and that you just can envision that how this then, as you're producing cortisol and cortisol during the loss grief process, and that it makes it harder for you to move forward, which is why being able to center and being able to change your hormones can really help you begin to move forward, even if it's just a little bit. And by the way, you're going to be hearing more about VUCA in session 2 of this webinar series. So there's something, by the way, that's really wonderful that's now called VUCA Prime. And it's the theory that that vision rises from volatility, and that extending reduces uncertainty. Excuse me. And that clarity counters complexity, and that agility overcomes ambiguity. So what happens as we're getting to VUCA Prime is you're going from that cortisol to the testosterone and the oxytocin. So your mind is back, and the information is back, and creativity is back, and risk-taking is back, and vision, understanding, clarity, and agility can really come your way. So we're going to shift to the topic of resilience. And I'd really appreciate your putting in the chat room, how do you define resilience?
Bounce. I love it. The ability to bounce back.
Right.
The ability to move forward, adapting, bounce forward. I like that too.
Yeah. Overcome, adaptability, reignite. Lovely.
And finding the energy to bounce.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So the definition that I use for resilience, and it really incorporates what all of you have been saying, and I do mean all of you. Resilience is knowing how to prepare for, how to cope with, how to adapt to, and learn from all kinds of stressful situations and adverse circumstances. And resilient people perform under pressure, and in the most challenging of circumstances, resilient people can recover faster. They can adapt and learn more effectively. They make better decisions. They communicate clearly, and they deal with change more powerfully. They are more self-aware, self-reflective, and self-confident, and they practice better self-care. And by the way, self-care is so important to resiliency. So resiliency is going from stress to calm, from scattered to centered, and from reactive to proactive. want to just mention something about stress management because it's different than resiliency. Stress management is what you do with the individual trigger. And so in stress management, I mean, some deal with stress management by trying to avoid it, see it coming, and move to a different place. But some of the things you do in stress management are avoid caffeine or alcohol or nicotine, or to do more physical activity, or to get more sleep, or use relaxation techniques, or talk to someone, or keep a journal or diary, or take control, or time management. And again, each of those things is either done to help avoid the stressor, or when the stressor is there, is to minimize the particular stressor. So resiliency includes recognizing the trigger, excuse me, letting go mentally and physically, shifting attention and focus, increased self-awareness, and embracing and sustaining positive emotions. So I want to take you through a very quick self-care exercise that's going to shift your energy. It's going to give you some self-care, and it's going to stimulate positive emotions. So I'd like each of you to stand up. And in standing up, feet about hip width apart, feet connected to the floor. Think of that long spine, long body. And your arms are out if you can do it at shoulder length. And by the way, if someone can't stand, they can do it in their chair. And your arms are out, and then think of energy coming, floating out your arms and through your fingers and heading towards the walls. And inhale up, and that long exhale. Now your arms over your head. And again, think of energy flowing through your arms, up your feet, through your body, up your arms, and out your fingers, up to the ceiling. And that good energy flow. And that inhale, uplift, and the long exhale. And then once again, your arms to your side, out to your side at shoulder height. And that energy flowing out your arms and to your fingers and to the walls. And that inhale up. And the long, wonderful exhale. Now bring your arms in front of you as if you're hugging a tree, a nice, just wonderful tree. You're just a real tree hugger. And that inhale up and the long exhale. And now take your arms and wrap them around as if you're hugging yourself. And that inhale up and that long, wonderful exhale. And even think of something that makes you smile. So I hope that you're experiencing from this self-care point of view, every time I do this exercise, I feel a little bit of release in my body and a clarity of focus in it. And I feel safe and secure as a result of it. And I have a little bit more energy. And I hope some pieces and parts of that actually come to you as well.
And Wendy, what I love this so much because it's so simple, and I could do it in a handful of seconds, just as a reminder when I feel like I really need to take care of myself, but I may not have time to do my full yoga or my physical therapy like I normally do.
Absolutely. Positively. And it does such good things. And the shift is so very, very fast. So I want you also to be aware of that when you think about being resilient and the actions that you take to be resilient, including this self-care part of it, the more resilient that you can become. And with resiliency comes choices. And with this sense of really thinking about this, that resiliency is something that you can build. It is not something that you're automatically born with, contrary to myth. So I now want to shift topics and go to choice and something called Kaizen. Kaizen is a small and important step that you can take. And by the way, Kaizen is Japanese. And in World War II or just after it, Kaizen was created and used in business as the continuous improvement, people coming up with a lot of small suggestions, and small suggestions that get implemented and ultimately take on make a big change. And in Kaizen, you're not taking on the whole problem. And if you try and take on the whole problem, think about your New Year's resolutions, you find that those big things actually go again to your amygdala and flight, fight, freeze, and suddenly no change is coming about. So the sensibility about the small and important step. So I worked with a client, and she was really being a great employee, except she came to late work 4 days a week, and she was driving her boss and her colleagues crazy. And she set alarms and multiple alarms and had friends call, and she never didn't get out of bed. And so her Kaizen was, her alarm went off, and her Kaizen was to put one foot on the floor. She could put it immediately back in bed. In any event, what she found pretty quickly is one foot on the floor. It was easy to get the second on the floor. She was out of bed, and she started coming to work on time. And then another example is a friend, colleague, who I met with him in the afternoon, and he had this package of cookies from the vending machine, and he was bemoaning the fact of eating cookies and gaining weight, and he wasn't happy. So his Kaizen wound up being to take the first cookie, and by the way, they were small cookies, and break it in half, and then he could throw the first half away and eat everything else. And he said, so what's going to happen? And I said, probably in a couple of days, maybe you won't even eat the first cookie, or just see what happens. I was with him a couple of weeks later, and he wasn't eating cookies in the afternoon. And so he said, suddenly he did this and it was easy, and he finally stopped eating cookies. But he did acknowledge that what he did when he began, and it was the first cookie and it was half the cookie, he did put the halves in his desk drawer just to be on the safe side. I think most of the time he didn't eat that first half. So know and notice that these things, these Kaizens, are very, very small actions. And there's a real challenge to come up with something small enough. And then the other way of a Kaizen is asking yourself a small, playful question. Your mind loves to solve problems. I mean, our minds are just made that way. And so I've used the small Kaizen question in the following way. When I really wanted to work on being good to my body and control what I was eating or do more exercise, my Kaizen question was, what small change can I make today to be good to my body? Small change, good to my body. And when I was working on this, I'm beginning to work on posture and maybe getting my head back a little bit, good for my neck. And I asked myself a Kaizen question, and what I noticed is, as I've asked it, there are many more times today that I've assumed better posture and lengthening my neck. So I know I'm so glad I had to work on this webinar. It's really helped me for my own Kaizen. So your challenge is a Kaizen challenge, which is to think about, and it may be a beginning for you, is a Kaizen. What's a small step that you can take that's going to allow you to begin to either start doing something or stop doing something, or something different that you want to do in moving forward. Or sometimes it's moving forward, and other times it can be letting go, or it can be a Kaizen question. So in the chat box, and for you to think about, is what small step will you take? And by the way, recognize that what you're doing now might be a draft, and that you want to work on it and refine it, because you might say, oh, well, this is really too big. I mean, it's the person who had to do a book review. She had committed to doing it, and she couldn't. She just, weeks went by and she hadn't opened the book. And her Kaizen wound up being to read one paragraph. Because she said, well, read one chapter. I said, way too big. Read one paragraph. And the next day, skim the first paragraph, read the second paragraph. And within 3 or 4 days, she was actually read a whole chapter of the book, and it became much easier for her to do. So what small step will you take, either an action or a question? And if you're really suffering and you can't come up with something, you can begin to think about a question, which is, what small step can I take to develop a Kaizen? So even that playful question might move you forward.
I love seeing some of these talking about going for a walk in the morning, going to bed early. And I'm sure, like many people, we've all been cooped up in our homes for weeks now. And just the idea of getting out into some fresh air, and even on a walk the other day, we stopped and literally looked at the flowers and enjoyed them because they were so beautiful. And it was just a momentary choice on our walk.
Excuse me, let me see what I can do about getting rid of the phone.
And I love seeing a vision board. Victoria, I wonder what does a vision board look like for you? And Helen, I wish I could drink one less cup of coffee each day. It's just not working for me yet. I know I should, but I know it has a direct impact on my sleeping pattern as well.
God, and I went from 1 cup of coffee, I'm now up to 2 cups of coffee. And I think the difference is that now I'm home all day, as opposed to previously, I'd have my coffee and leave and be out. So yeah, 1 cup of coffee would be good.
Oh, Victoria, I love that. Your vision board, a big poster board with cut out pictures from magazines of things that I want to weave into my life. I love it.
So recognize that as you do your Kaizen, because the Kaizen is small and you really are highly likely to be able to do it more than once and do it every day, every week, and it really becomes part of your life, and it becomes empowering and energizing, because as you're able to do that, it's easier to add something else as long as it's really very small. So I really encourage you to do that. So returning to my aspiration, that I hope that you have at least one new insight, whether it's about loss and or grief, or it's about resiliency and stress, or it's that you have a choice and a Kaizen. And then I want to leave you with a quote. It's from Peter Drucker, who is a well-regarded management consultant. And he said, "The greatest danger in times of turbulence is not the turbulence itself, but to act with yesterday's logic." So thank you so much. And now I encourage all of you, it's a time for questions and comments.
And Wendy, thank you so much. As I think about a Kaizen moment, one of the things I am daily reminded of is the importance of sharing gratitude and saying thank you. So certainly I'm saying thank you to you for sharing your time, but it makes me think of all the wonderful colleagues and friends and people I have in my life. I talk a lot about the importance of relationships in our professional lives, certainly in our personal lives. But I feel very fortunate to have such wonderful friends and mentors and colleagues like you. So for those of you, if anybody happens to be in one of these pictures in the audience, and I do think there is exactly at least one of you here, thank you for being a part of my life. I think it's more important now than ever that we are reminded of how important our relationships are. So let's open it up to some comments or questions. If anybody has anything you want to ask Wendy, now's the time. We've got a good handful of minutes left. One of the things that I've been aware of in talking with colleagues and students is our default is, I don't want to say everybody's default is despair, but because we're so overwhelmed by what's going on around us, that it's hard to find, sometimes hard to find the positive things, whether it's flowers or enjoying a morning walk. What are your recommendations for people, that simple thing to shift from a negative mindset to a positive mindset? You've gone through a few things, but what do you do when you find yourself with those negative thoughts creeping up?
Well, I have a wonderful view out my window. It's a very expansive view, and I've been using that a lot during this whole period of time, the last couple of months. And so for me, I look out, I look at the National Cathedral and into Georgetown, and I see sky and clouds. And I'm really grateful for the view and the sense of space, because the visual sense of space is internally allowing me to have space. And I think in gratitude, we often are looking again, it goes to that concept of change. It's, you want something and it's so big. And what's so wonderful are all the little things about gratitude. And it can be anything because you love that cup of coffee, and you're thankful to have it. Or with me, Greg, looking at those pictures and seeing so many of my museum colleagues in those photos that you had, and just the sense of connection. I'm really grateful for that. I'm personally grateful that I've had an opportunity to do work in the museum field, because the museum field is such a collaborative field. People are so generous of spirit. So I feel gratitude about generosity, which is why you're doing this series, and everyone else who's supporting you, including myself on it. I'm very grateful that I have a little bird, and she is very funny when she's not biting me. And so, there are just a lot of little things that I'm really grateful for. And then I'm grateful for health.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And Wendy, what's your bird's name? Keiko?
Her name is Tycho, Tyko, and she is named after Dr. Buteyko. And he was Lithuanian, and he created some very specialized breathing exercises that are very good for people with asthma. And so by naming her Tycho, it was a reminder that I should do my breathing exercises, and it mainly works.
And Wendy, I see that folks have typed in a few things that they do, finding something to appreciate, write down 3 things you're grateful for, planting flowers. I remember my mom used to, who suffered from anxiety and depression, was none of those things when she was in her garden planting flowers. So it's that's a wonderful thing. Journaling, checking on somebody else, wonderful interactions with an 87-year-old neighbor because I mailed him a card when I couldn't find his phone number. I got thank you so much for that, Suzanne. I got a lovely card from a colleague I hadn't heard from in a long, long time. And it was so delightful to actually get something handwritten. And it was a gorgeous card. Roseanne keeps strips of paper with notations of good things that I've experienced and review them on difficult days. That's great. Put on some happy music and dance. Yep, I'm. Nobody needs to see me dance, and nobody needs to hear my music. I'm somewhere stuck in the 80s. I hate to say, but I'll own it. And let's see here. We've got a couple of questions that came in. Catherine asked for a Seton Hall graduate of 2016, laid off from my permanent position, was told that I'm wanted back if it can be afforded. What's another simple way to start processing this? On the one hand, laid off. On the other, I'm wanted back and my performance was good. I've already planted a garden, worked out, and talked to friends and family. What are your thoughts, Wendy?
It's a challenging situation, because on the one hand, there's a possibility that you may be rehired, and on the other hand, there's a possibility that you might not. And so I think that it's a good thing for you to really focus on, think about what, and go through the whole webinar series with Greg, so that you're going to end up with a great sense of what your worth is, what your brand is, how you would market yourself. And if you go back to the job you've had, isn't that fabulous? You'll go back stronger. And if that job doesn't materialize, you're going to be positioned for getting another job, a different job, and often a better job. And because if you don't do that, sometimes people wind up stuck in that state of bargaining. Well, if I just wait, I'm going to have this job. And in which case you might find that you're living in suspended animation. And from my personal experience, that's not a particularly good place to live.
Thank you so much for that, Wendy. One of the things I work with my coaching clients on quite a bit is actually the next webinar in our series, and that is rediscovering your strengths, skills, and passions. My experience working with colleagues is that we don't often take the time to dig deep and do some serious self-reflection about what we are in fact good at and skilled at and passionate about. For those of us in the museum field, I would argue that we're in this field because we really love something. We love art or history or science or children or whales. And so we are deeply committed to the work we do. And so it's hard to separate out what we value and what we're good at from our role in the museum. So Catherine, if you are hired again, that's great. But as Wendy pointed out, if you get hired back and you come ready to go with a clarity about your skills and strengths and values, I think you'll be a much stronger place. Wendy, Kate has a comment here, a question. How would you approach a moment in life when you are at a crossroads? I have a career that stalled due to Corona, New York City address. I'm having trouble figuring out what road to take. It's overwhelming and frustrating.
It certainly is. I agree that it is both overwhelming and frustrating. And it goes back to the VUCA thing and all of the uncertainty. And there's so many things that are truly out of your control, which exacerbates the situation. So again, I come back to thinking about what are the things that you can do. So what are some of the things that you can do to take care of yourself? What are some of the things that you can do in really identifying, being self-aware? And as Greg said, what are your strengths? And what is your brand? And how would you sell yourself to other people? Because what we don't know is we don't know how many museum jobs are coming back and what those jobs are going to be.
Or any jobs, really, museum or otherwise.
Or museum or otherwise. And then it's going to be a matter for all of us is to really think in terms of what are the skills we have and how do those skills transfer? And how do I speak positively about how my skills can be used in another application, another situation?
Yes,
and by the way, what you're feeling is really legitimate.
Absolutely. And just as a reminder, I pasted the link to the webinar series for those of you who may not have seen that, but feel free to register for any of the other programs. We've worked I've worked with a number of my colleagues like Wendy to develop a series over time, over the month of May, that gets at very specific aspects that you can tackle, whether it's your skill set or powering up your personal brand, or simply taking time to work on your resume in anticipation of applying for a new job if that's what you're doing. I just want to call your attention. I pulled up a feedback poll. I would love to have your feedback on this program. And if you have any comments, please feel free to make them into the chat box. But your feedback is important as we get started on this particular series. Diane and Amanda, you're asking about the recordings. Yes, I will make sure the recording is available for anybody who registered for the program. Leslie has a comment. I too have a long career that stalled, and I was told I needed to forget working in your field and do something else. At 60, not many want someone that age transitioning to something different. So I keep researching on my own and look for lower level supporting jobs. Now these are nowhere on hold and likely no hires. What are your thoughts about this situation, Wendy?
Well, there was an op-ed piece in the Washington Post this past weekend from Ray Suarez, who was a reporter. He was at NPR, Al Jazeera, several places, and is now without a job. And the sense about ageism and what it is like and how difficult it can be because employers consciously or unconsciously are nervous about hiring us older folk. I was thinking about the difference in the photo that's on the piece that Greg developed, and now, and including now with the virus. And I haven't been to the hairdresser, so I now actually have gray hair. So it's quite a change. It really involves a real strategy and thinking through about what else can you do, and how can you again brand yourself and market yourself and talk about yourself that is positive and that is with energy. And I think the whole series can really be helpful to you in that regard. And yes, without a doubt, there is some issues about ageism, and it's not always easy to get around.
Yeah, I myself, I'm approaching 60, even though it's hard for me to think like that. I don't feel 60. I don't think 60, but it's approaching. And so I sometimes wonder what's next, or if my current job is the end of the road for me, or what would happen if, et cetera, et cetera. And then I often look to you, Wendy, and think of you on a number of levels as an inspiration, of course, as a friend and a mentor. But I think that you've done a marvelous job reinventing yourself several times in your careers.
At least 3 major times. And even this right now, I do a lot of executive leadership coaching. And I transitioned from being a consultant and having my own company, which I started in 1990. So kind of a trailblazer as a woman, and being out on my own. And then something I thought about is that people really, you get to a certain point, and then they don't want you as a consultant because you're too old. They remind you of their grandmother or their great grandmother or something like that. And so one of the things I realized, part of the job that I loved was coaching executives, and I decided to get certified. And people love old, chronologically mature, experienced coaches, and age is not working against me. And as a consultant, it was potentially beginning to work against me. So, that's one way that I repositioned myself. And it was going back to what was the part of my work that gave me the most satisfaction. And with coaching, it just opened up. And the day I realized that, I went online, I applied to the Georgetown Leadership Coaching Program, and I was very fortunate and I got in, and it's really pivoted the focus of my life. And what I find as a coach is the coaching field is as generous as the museum field is from a collegial point of view. It's quite wonderful. Yeah.
Well, and I think about my own career paths, and I say paths because I've had several. And one of the constants through my paths is a real passion and a real focus on helping people in their careers. Wendy, you and I worked on our career book together. I spent 10 years of a previous career as the Director of Professional Development at the American Alliance of Museums. I now am the Director of a graduate program in museum professions at Seton Hall. So all of these aspects, these threads of my careers coming together around careers and helping people in their careers. And now Purple Cow, something is really important to me, but it's because it's something I'm very, very passionate about. And I like to believe that that passion and my expertise in it will carry me forward. Thanks, Joanna.
By the way,
yeah.
I was going to say that the person, was it Victoria, who did the vision board? I did one with again, it was a collage with a number of friends, and I actually have it out on up by my desk. It's quite a big thing. And there were pieces and parts of it that were quite mysterious to me. I wasn't quite sure what they meant. And over time, it's interesting, they became so clear and very, and really empowered me. So that's something else that people can really do. And I do know, Greg, that you and I spent a lot of time as you were thinking about what it was that you wanted to do. And one of the things that you had around you and I had around me is friends who really supported us while we were in transition. And that really does help to have support and to find the people who believe that you can be successful, that you can do things, helps, versus the people who say, oh, you'll never be able to do that.
Well, on that note, Wendy, our time is up, and I want to thank you again for a wonderful presentation and for sharing your passion and expertise with me and with our colleagues. Just a quick reminder to everybody in the audience, our series will continue on Thursday with Rediscover Your Strengths, Skills, and Passions, where I will be joined by my colleague and dear friend, Marcia Semmel, and I think Marcia may still be in the audience with us. But I hope that you will consider joining me and Marcia for that, or any of the other programs coming up on Tuesdays and Thursdays in May. Thank you all so much for joining us. On behalf of Purple Cow Career and Talent Development, I'm Greg Stevens. Enjoy the rest of your day.